All right. Thank you, Ryan. Everybody, welcome. This is, as Ryan mentioned, we're going to start doing this webinar series to try and help you with some of the tasks that you need to do as a DOT and how BRM can help you to accomplish that. This being the season where one starts to prepare for submittal, and especially with the change to the SNBI, we figured this is a good topic to cover at about this time. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about why this is an ideal time to talk about submitting, but essentially this is a really good place to start. Um, as we do with all of my presentations, I am going to start with my contact information. You can screenshot this, or I'll have the same slide at the end. I always do. It should be on all of the webinars. The different ways that you can reach out to us, whether that's to me personally, or if you're submitting something about BRM, you can go with the JIRA tickets. But really, whatever is happening, never suffer in silence. Always feel like you can reach out to us and ask us a question or ask us, hey, I tried to do this, or hey, I can't find the videos. Any questions, please feel free to reach out to us. Okay? So, with that part being established, let's start talking about how you submit to the SNBI. So, we're going to start with the highest level of these things. I realize some of you are experts in this and have been doing this for years, or in some cases, decades. I mean, I've even been doing, we were just talking about this a few minutes ago. I've been doing this now for, I did the submittal several years at Utah DOT before I came over to work for Mayvue. And then I've been coaching agencies in how to do these submittals for about 10 years now. And with the SNBI, the process is going to change just a little bit, but we're going to talk about that. So, the overview for those who are starting, because some of you I realize are new to this or are in a new management position over a person who has to do the submittal, it's good to cover some of the basics. So, the very basic. Every year you need to submit your data to federal highways. The instruction for this, the rule for this, comes from the Code of Federal Regulations. Okay. In particular, it's Section 650, and there's a part of it that you will see that talks about the inventory, and it says that you have to submit your inventory data to FHWA on an annual basis or whenever requested. So if ever this comes up, and I've had this come up, why do you need to inspect my bridge? This is a private bridge. Why, who gives you the authority, or why do we need to do this? This is the answer, is because it's part of the Code of Federal Regulations, and this is the section that you can cite to them. If ever you get into discussions with lawyers, this is the part where you start. So good to have that in case you didn't know that that section existed. This is why you have to submit your data every year. Okay, now, Federal Highways right now has the submittal always being done on March 15th. That's when the data is due. We'll talk a little bit about variations to that in a minute, but with this idea of March 15th is when the data is due, that means that there are some things that you need to be doing before that. In fact, there are some things that you should probably be considering doing now as we're going into December, we're getting ready for Christmas. You kind of have most of the inspection data for the last year collected. Granted, you may still be missing some things from this month, but you're starting to arrive at the point where submittal is on the horizon and you should start thinking about this. So this is actually the ideal time to be discussing what are the things you should be thinking about. All right. So with that, we're going to talk about the process that you go through. For the veterans, this is a very familiar pattern that we always go through every year. And you get a feeling for about how much time you need for each step as you go through this cycle every time. We're going to talk about this. This is pretty much the topic for today. So we're going to talk about this a lot. There is this preparation step. Preparation step may be the kind of thing that we only have to do once. We have the things set up the way that we need. Maybe we don't have to revisit this often. Then you have essentially what are your level 1 iterations. In fact, actually, I should turn off my camera so that you can see this full screen. You have your level 1 iterations, and these are the parts that you go through. You're going to go through this. In fact, actually, let me show you the next slide. After I changed there we go, next slide. Level one iterations are going to be the kind of thing that you repeat as often as needed. So the first time you go through it, you may find that your data has a lot of flags to it or a lot of issues that come up. And you go through and start cleaning up some of those items. And I'll talk about it and show you how you do that in a minute. For what it's worth, your local federal highways rep typically likes to know about how high was that number of flags when you started the first iteration. And then some updates about how clean it's looking as you go through the other steps. It's something that they appreciate. You don't have to tell them, but they do appreciate knowing that you've been working on it and the number of items has come down. So that's the level one iterations. And I'm going to even show you an example of what that looks like to do some of that. But then we go to the level two iterations, which is where you start to use Federal Highway's own website that has a file check system on it. And we're going to talk about that part as well today. You go through that one as often as needed until the file comes back clean. And then that can be on April or March 15th, or it could be before March 15th, perhaps even. We'll talk about it in a minute. Is that submit to Federal Highways part. That's when you actually send the data in and you feel the weight lifted off your back, and finally you can breathe relaxed that, okay, we have submitted for this year. So now I'm going to walk you through all of these pieces, and then I'm going to show you some examples of what this looks like. Okay, but essentially, we're going to keep coming back to this slide. We're going to keep coming back to this process. This is the process that you go through every year to get ready to submit your data to Federal Highways. You're going to go through and clean up the data. You're going to check it against Federal Highway site, and then you're going to submit the data to them. So let's start by talking about the preparation step. Okay. The first thing that you need to decide is what data you're going to submit and when. Some agencies submit their data on a quarterly basis. Most agencies submit their data on an annual basis. Some submit their data soon after the New Year's in January. Most submit it sometime in March, the beginning of March. You shouldn't submit your data after March 15th. That's when the data is due. When I was first trained by my mentor in how to do this, he drilled into me that even if the day arrives on a Saturday, you come into the office on Saturday to send it in that day. Well, it turns out that Federal Highways can accept the data on the Friday before. You don't have to come in and work Saturday to submit that day. It's okay to submit a little bit earlier. Definitely talk through what are your plans for when to submit with your local Federal Highways rep. Then also I will say that some agencies submit their data of all inspections up through New Year's. Some include all of the data through February. Some include the data right up to March 15th. What was the inspection that was done on March 14th? Deciding which data it is that you're going to submit is another one of those decisions that you need to make. And it would be best to have that discussion this week instead of finding out what you're going to submit, or that what you plan to submit wasn't what perhaps the senior leaders above you wanted you to submit in a few months. This is a discussion to have now. Okay. Second thing with preparation. You are probably going to need access to Federal Highways system. This means that you're going to need to be able to log into a federal site to upload your file. In order to do this, you need to go through the security clearance process, the UPACS process. What's more, the UPACS process has changed since last year, I believe. So you're going to need to go through the process of getting a new ID for this, or a new login for this. It's going to take a little while. And that's the main thing that I want to warn you about getting the UPACS login. This can take days. It could potentially take weeks. This is the kind of thing to go through the process now. So there should be at least one person at your DOT who is capable of logging into the system and sending these files through to Federal Highways. If you don't have someone at your DOT. And let's say you're in the unfortunate position of watching this webinar the week before the data is due. Reach out to your local representative. They might have access to this system. Odds are that they already have the ability, they already have this clearance to log in and upload things. So it may be that they need to submit your file for you. In the absolute worst case, they can get in contact with the Central Office of Federal Highways and help you work through other ways that you could send the data in if that becomes necessary. Just like with Mayvue, just like with BRM and AASHTOWare, don't be afraid to reach out to Federal Highways for help. It's much easier to have these discussions beforehand instead of trying to ask for extensions or I mean, because I can't give extensions. It's better to ask for this before than to get down to the last minute and be scrambling. They will work with you. They will help you. They're looking to try and make this a smooth process too. So don't be afraid to reach out to them. But if you're the person who needs to do the submittal, you're the one who's going to upload the file, it's time to probably start looking at that UPAX login. All right. Okay. The other thing that you need to think through is making the filters of what data you're going to submit to Federal Highways. So to kind of walk you through this Venn diagram of what this might look like inside of BRM, there are the structures that you have access to, which is this red box. That might be all of them because you are the trusted person, but it's possible that you might not have access to the bridges that are no longer in service, or you might not have access to bridges outside of a particular district, for example. There are reasons why you might have limited access. So that red box. Inside that, and I'm going to show you this process inside of BRM, you select potentially a subset of those bridges. So that's my blue box there. Of those bridges, there is going to be a checkbox in BRM for, do you report these bridges to Federal Highways? I'm going to show you that box in a minute. That's this black box here. Only the things that have report to Federal Highways marked as true and that are in your selected list will go into that JSON file. And as a word of warning, as a stopgap in the event that you need access to more perhaps than you have, there is a select all option on that page. I'll show it to you in just a minute. That would get you everything inside the black box, even if you didn't normally have access to those bridges. That also means that as you remove structures from your inventory, you need to make sure to uncheck report to Federal Highways, because they may not be something that you have access to, but they would still end up in that file if I said select, just give me everything that's in the black box. Okay, so that's the Venn diagram. We're going to talk about how to make that filter. I'm actually going to give you an example in just a minute. But to show you that checkbox that we're talking about, it's this one. On the inventory and appraisal section identification page, right where we have what is the number of the bridge and what is the name of the bridge, there's a checkbox right there for, do I report this bridge to Federal Highways? And you'll notice the corollary with it next to it there, report the elements to Federal Highways. If this is checked, then saying select all will bring up that bridge. Also, if there are bridges that you don't want to submit to Federal Highways, uncheck this box. Maybe they're in construction, or maybe they've been removed from the inventory, like they've been demolished, they don't exist anymore. This is the list that it's worth going through and pruning and making sure that what you submit is the list you planned to submit. So that's why this is in the preparation step. Once you have the filters set up the way that you would like them, this kind of becomes a thing that you just go and select the filter every year, and you can skip these 5 minutes of the video. Okay, so with that having been said, let me go show you an example from BRM directly. So we're going to switch over here to BRM. Let me just confirm with one of my panelists here. You do see BRM, correct? I'm not sharing just PowerPoint?
Correct.
Okay, just making sure before I talk for 10 minutes on it and then it turns out you couldn't see it. Okay, So we're going to go make a filter. I'm going to go to settings and the general configuration, inspection. I took a wrong turn. You're probably going to take a wrong turn too at this point. Pages and dashboards. That's okay. We're learning. And in this case, I am going to my filters. So I'm going to go through and create a filter. And in this case, I want to create a filter. You can see I may have a lot of filters and perhaps you don't yet. That's okay. You will get to having a lot of filters at some stage. I'm going to create a new one, and I'm going to call this one the report to FHWA. And for the description, structures where report to FHWA is true, for example. Okay. These last pieces here that are asking about, like, is this an access filter or do I share this filter with other people? We're not going to worry about this for this particular filter, but if it is something that you wanted to share with others, this is how you would have that option to share it with other people or limit people's access to only the bridges that are submitted, for example. Okay. Next, I am going to go and set up the criteria for this. And in this case, my criteria is just the ones that I am going to submit. So I'm going to go ahead and add, and in this case, we're looking for something from the bridge table. And my field here is the report to FHWA. It should be right here, right? I can spell. It's before these fields. Report to FHWA. There it is. All right, and this value must be true. So now that I have created that, I now have this filter that will give me just the bridges where report to federal highways is true. In order for me to be able to double check that this filter is getting me the bridges that I want, I could go back to like the bridge list, for example. And on the bridge list, I could go find a filter here of report to FHWA, and it would give me this list. And I can go through and check, is this the list of bridges that I do indeed want to submit to federal highways? That filter is going to be really handy for all of the other steps that we're going to do. And that's the part that I'm going to show you here in just a minute. Okay. Looking at my questions box, I have not seen any questions come in from you yet. So I'm going to keep moving, but don't be afraid to type in your questions in the Q&A box if you have any from anything that I've covered. And we may either cover them as they fit in the presentation, or I may leave some of them and come back to them at the end. All right. So that was our example of how to make a filter of the bridges that I plan to submit. Now we're going to start the level 1 iterations. If you remember from that process that I had before, that slide that I had before, there's that preparation part where I get my login to UPACS and I make the filters that I need, and those are all kind of one-time setup things. Now we're getting into the part that iterates often. So this first part, we are going to run validation inside of BRM and use BRM's file check to check and clean up the data. And as necessary, we may need to go through and fix some things that have been submitted by the inspectors. In this particular case, I am using sample data where I have intentionally adjusted it to only get a few particular things to come up. So this is not actually representative of the data of an agency. It has been manipulated, but we're going to use this to show the example of what kind of things you would see. And you're going to go through this as often as you need to try and get a clean file. And this is why you want to start this process. It's even something that you could start today if you have BRM 7. If you don't have BRM 7 stood up yet, this might be an incentive to start working on that so that you can at least look at what are the things that are going to come up in the validation process. Now, there are also some changes. There are some latest additions to what the file should look like from Federal Highways. There will be a patch to BRM 7.1 in the new year that will clean up and try and keep in sync with what exactly Federal Highways wants. It would not surprise me if the process changes as we go through these test submittals for 2026 and 2027. But if there are changes, just stick with BRM. We're going to be making all of those changes too, as needed. Okay, let me show you, actually, before I do, just because the question came in, are tunnels handled separately? They are still a separate file. I'm going to show you that file at one point as it comes up. Tunnels are essentially still being done the same way, but I will show you how that works. Cliff has a good question about the elements part. I'm going to come back to that one in just a little bit. So let me show you that in a minute here as well. Okay, first, let's go through and do a worked example of what these iterations look like inside of BRM. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under Bridges and Validate. This is the validation process inside of BRM. Notice that it has that filter that I had selected. So this is why you would make that report to FHWA list to get that filter of just the bridges you plan to submit. For this example, I'm going to work with a much shorter list of bridges because I just want to give you a few examples of this. All right, so with this list, I'm going to select the bridges that I want to validate. And then over here, I'm going to click the Validate button. You will see that spin for a little bit, and then it will say that it validated them successfully. And I see two more tabs pop up here. One of them is a summary, and one of them is the results. The summary is going to give me kind of a high-level overview of the bridges that I submitted. How many critical errors were there, and how many general errors were there, kind of at a high level. And this list may be long initially, and it's okay. This is why we go through the process sooner instead of later. Start in December, start in January, ideally, instead of starting the week before it's due or a few days before it's due. The results tab is going to give it to me in more detail. We're going to talk each item of each individual bridge. Okay. Now, this is a particularly structured example, so I only have 10 errors. But you might start with this and it may have several pages of errors, and that's okay. This is why we're checking it beforehand. You might also notice some patterns because in the migration, there are some temporary codes that come in. And perhaps your inspectors have only inspected half the bridges, so there's a lot of temporary codes still hanging out there. Or maybe you haven't populated the substructure values, or there are reasons why you might not have all of the data yet. And this is exactly why we're going through this now, so that you have a feeling for how many items are there in there? Are there things that I can fix in one large swoop? Are there things that I need to go through and check individually? Are there things that perhaps Federal Highways guidance is changing even as we speak on some of these items? I'll talk about that in a minute too. It is handy, and I recommend it. You can export this list to Excel, and that is really how I always do this. Export the list to Excel. I'm going to go ahead and open that. And remember I said that your Federal Highways rep wants to know the first time that you run this, how many items were there? And it may start off with a number in the thousands or tens of thousands. That's the number that they are curious to know where it starts initially. And then as you work through and clean up the data, you get down till it's under 1,000, or you get down till it's under 10, till you're down and it's clean. That's what they would like to know. What is that process of cleaning up the errors, and maybe what are some of the errors? It's nice for them to know. Okay. So because I see one of the questions here, the checks in this validate should mirror exactly the file checks that you would get from Federal Highway's own website. I'll mention it again in a little bit, but if you ever see discrepancies between what BRM picks out and what the Federal Highway site picks out, please let us know, because they should be essentially the same check between both systems. And if for any reason they're not, which right now we're in transition and they're trying to get ready for submittal, we're trying to keep up with them, there might be gaps, but let us know because that helps everybody in the country if you ever find one that's different from the others. Okay. Um, so let's go through and pick some of these that we can make an adjustment for. The first thing that I'm going to point out, this one here for BEP01, these bridges are open, but it says that something has to be submitted for their posting code. We've been discussing this with Federal Highways. This is one of the things that's going to be fixed in the patch. So I actually don't need to worry about those ones right now. I realize that makes up like 5 of my codes, so I should have 5 other ones to use for the rest of my example. So I'm going to take these ones right here in particular. These ones are the ones I'm going to go through and fix these right now. So you'll see this first one is a highway code, and it says that the highway code must be a valid option. Okay. So I'm going to go back to my bridge data. In particular for highways, that means that I'm going to go to my features for this particular bridge, which is 93201. I'm going to go look at this bridge. For one of my features here, and bear with me while I remember which one, it's telling me that my code for H04 was not the right code. And you can see it right here, BH04. It has an N, which is not one of the right values. My option should instead be not N space, but just N, not on the network. See that? So there was an extra space hidden in that one. And that's the thing that I'm cleaning up, essentially. So I pick the value that it should be. I come down here and save. The other item that I had on the same bridge is this one, load rating 07. It must contain digits, essentially. So let's switch over to my load rating page. I'm going to go to load ratings. Load rating for this particular bridge, the one with the stars, the one that I'm reporting. On this one, it's telling me the error code was BLR07. Now, you could look it up in the guide to see what LR07 means. I happen to know that's the controlling load rating. So I don't have a bridge, or I don't have one of my load ratings picked for my controlling legal load rating. And normally it would be the lowest of these, which I believe is this one. So I would go in here and say, this is the one that I'm reporting for BLR07. Okay. Now, if I were to go back to my validation and run the process again, last time I had 10 errors, and this time I have 8 errors. So you can see I have cleaned up 2 of the errors. My list has gotten shorter, right? And this is the process that you're going through as you go through and address the items, find the problems with the data, and clean them up. Now, I'm intentionally leaving a few of these still undone so that I can show you what happens to them in the next step. But this is the general idea of how you go through and clean up your data. All right, now I'm going to go over to some of the questions. I am pleased to see I'm getting more questions now. This is good. This first one asks if BRM is going to support the SNBI submission for years to the FHWA for like historical data. This is a good question. The details are actually nuanced. We are following closely what Federal Highways advises us to do in terms of past data, but there's continually new guidance as we get further into the submittal process that we're seeing. Maybe we don't want the construction history since the construction of the bridge, for example, but maybe we do want more of the posting history, anything you've got. That's an ongoing discussion with Federal Highways about how much of the past data is getting submitted. So again, we're in that discussion. You just follow with us and BRM is going to keep you on the right path. Okay. Another question here. It might be worth mentioning that the validation checks are updated with 7.1. Yes, that is a good point. So if you went through the checks in 7.0, 7.0, 7.01, 2, or 3, you may have seen some fixes, but we are continually trying to keep this close to the latest and greatest that we have found from federal highways. So the checks that you see in 7.01, or sorry, in 7.1 are better than what you saw in 7.03. And in the later patch that comes up essentially next month, it's going to get even closer to what federal highways has as well. Talk about trying to hit a moving target. They are also making fixes as we report items to them. And so between the two processes, we're doing our best to try and keep them as in sync as possible. Okay. So there's a question of who's responsible for creating the validation logic. So AASHTOWare aims to have it mimic federal highways rules, but we're also trying to arrive at the same place that federal highways does. So basically the answer to that is that we are trying to match federal highways process exactly. In BRM6 and the old NBI submittal format, because it had not changed in years, we were exactly in sync between the two processes. In fact, it reached a point where we once discovered a bug that we were able to pass on to federal highways, where if you happen to have a column at exactly 30 feet, no, exactly 30 meters off of the highway, the sufficiency rating was rounding before doing other math, and you're supposed to do the other math and then round according to the coding guide. Like those kinds of corrections are where we want to get to. Right now, everything is in a little more flux as both we and federal highways try to adjust the rules. Okay. The last question I'm seeing there is asking about when inspections of different types were performed and how that's going to show up in the submittal. I'm actually going to leave this question for a few minutes because I need to go look at my inspection intervals as one of those pieces in the next step. So we'll come back to this and let's see if I answer your question in just a minute. Okay. And then there's another question I'm just seeing. Has there been any new guidelines on what errors are acceptable in the first submittal? This is part of that ongoing discussion where Federal Highways is trying to update their site to not show you errors that would necessarily be a problem, or to not reject things if the system can handle it. It's an ongoing discussion, and so I would say definitely continue to work with your local rep about the items that you have seen, and if you're able to include us, CC us in some of the emails so that we know the things that you're seeing, and hopefully they're things that we're also seeing from other agencies, and we can catch you up on what we've heard. But this is kind of this first submittal season, we're doing the best that we can. Everything is in flux. It's going to be kind of interesting. Okay, so that takes us through this first level of iterations. Okay, you would go through the process until you've cleaned up all of the items and you don't see any more errors, or the only errors, maybe you reach out to me because you're saying, hey, Zac, I can't seem to get rid of, like that one that was the posted 01. You could email me and say, like, this is still showing up. What should I do? And I go, oh, no, that one we're going to take care of in the patch. That can work too. Now we're going to go on to the level 2 iterations. This is where instead of using BRM's built-in file check, I'm going to use Federal Highways file check that exists for doing exactly these iterations. Okay. The ones built into BRM are really nice because it's convenient. It's in the software. It's quick to be able to switch back and forth between the tabs and do things. This next one's going to have a few more steps to it. But this is like the more sure check because they keep their file check exactly in sync with their submittal receiving process. And so Technically, if ever there's a discrepancy between the two, the Federal Highways file check is the correct thing. Please report it to us at BRM so that we can fix it for all of the other agencies. Okay? So this second step, the second level iterations, we are going to generate a submittal file. And this kind of goes through the exercise of what it's like to make that file. Then we're going to take it to that Federal Highways file check and upload it. It's going to process the list and give me the same list essentially that I was seeing in BRM. What are the critical errors and what are the general errors? And then I go through and start cleaning that up. If there are any bugs in the process, report that to AASHTOWare. Send that to me. Even if that's that you send me an email and I make a JIRA ticket out of it, that's preferable to us not knowing that it's a thing. Please let us know, because this is how you help everybody in the country. Okay? Okay, so with that, let's show you what this looks like to create that SNBI file. So I am going to go back to the top level here to submittals. And under submittals, I have two options, the SNBI export and the SNTI export. So there was an earlier question about the SNTI export and how do you create that file in BRM? And the answer is you go right there and you create it. It's going to look very similar to what I do with the bridge side. But yes, technically the SNTI file is a separate file. You're going to get one file from SNTI and one from SNBI. Okay, so one for tunnels and one for bridge. Okay, so I'm going to take the SNBI one for this example. I'm going to take these bridges and I'm going to export my selected into that SNBI format. Now, I mentioned with the Venn diagram earlier that there is this option to click Export All. Export All would give me a file that is everything inside that black box. Everything where Submit to Federal Highways is true. It will send all of that. Okay, I'm not doing that right now. I'm doing my constructed example of just 5 bridges. So I'm going to export this selected list. It is going to make this JSON file for me. If you are curious to look at the JSON file, it is cleaner than looking at the old NBI format where it was essentially just the values, like the places of the values meant things. Now you can actually read it. You can go search for a particular bridge. You can go find a particular code and see that, oh, sure enough, it is submitting an N for that. And maybe that's not what I wanted, or that is what I wanted. You can see the file if you're curious to read it. Okay, let me show you where the file check process is. All right, when you go to the NBI website for federal highways, you can Google search FHWA, NBI, or SNBI. It's probably going to take you to this page. Okay, this is the one that we're looking at. We're working in the new format now. So I'm going to go into this page. And right here, the SNBI Data Submittal Validation module. This is the one we're going to use. We are going to validate our data. Now, clicking on that, it's going to bring up, this is what it looks like. Notice that I have to select what my agency is before I upload the data. So this is why I wasn't using just like a test example data set. This is actually going to compare it against the bridges that they were expecting. And it will tell us that, hey, none of the bridges in that file match the agency that you're using. So in this case, Rhode Island has been kind enough to let us use their data to show you exactly what this looks like. But again, it's a contrived example where I've intentionally adjusted it. I'm going to pick that SNBI export file and open that and upload it. And this one's pretty small because it's only 5 bridges in it. That's on purpose. So we're not waiting a lot of time for that. I'm now going to download the processing report. And this is going to give me another spreadsheet. This spreadsheet looks like this. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see it. There is a summary. how many errors did it find? How many bridges were in the file? So in this case, I uploaded 5 bridges. It found 2 general errors. It found 6 total flags. And then down here, I get into more detail about what were like primary errors, acceptable errors, or just that summary of like what were the items that were flagged most often. This is really good information. This is nice to go through because it tells you like, hey, these are the kinds of things that could be causing problems. In this case, I'm going to go to, it wasn't that one. It was, yeah, these are the ones that I've saved in particular for this example. That my IE07, I know I hadn't filled that value in. And they say, you really need to say, is it method 1 or method 2? Also notice here, there's this one about the polarity of my longitude. That might be the kind of thing that you would reach out to me and say, hey, are these values supposed to be positive or negative? In this case, this is an acceptable error. They can realize that the bridges are not in the Eastern Hemisphere. They're over here in the New World. So they know what the value is. That's why acceptable errors are just a heads up. There's an issue there. But still, it's the kind of things that we aim for perfection as best we can to clean them up. So this is the example I'm going to go through now. I'm going to go to this bridge and clean up both the railroad service type and my interval method for my inspection intervals. Okay, so I would go into BRM with that spreadsheet, and I would go to this particular bridge. In this case, I'm going to start with bridges, inventory. I'm on my features. This is for a different bridge. Oop, I'll do that again. Come on. This one. Okay. My railroad, it said, was using the wrong value. It had T, and it should be one of these. So it may be that I know what the value is. I may have to go look it up, but the point is to fix that one. In this case, I'm going to guess that it's passenger rail, for example. The other thing that comes up is about my, oh, no, other one, inspection schedule. It's saying that my method was not filled in for routine or NSTM, actually, now that I'm looking at it. And in both of these cases, I used method 1, for example. Okay. Go ahead and fix those values. And then I would go back through the same process. So let me go back to my submittals and the SNBI export, and I would generate the file for that bridge, or for those, in this case, this list of bridges. I would come back here and choose a file, and we're going to do the newer one, and upload. This may take a little while, but I should have a shorter list of errors this time. I'll open it over here. Okay, so this time that acceptable errors list is shorter. I fixed 2 of them. See that? And so I go through this process. Looks like I've got one here for my deck areas that I might need to go fix. I'll go look into that one. But I go through this process, and actually, that's why that one was left as an example. Notice that it says that it has to be a numeric value with 1 decimal place. And I seem to have a numeric value with 1 decimal place. So this might be an example where I've noticed something wrong. It looks like BRM is submitting the right data, but Federal Highways is still calling that out as an error. In which case, I report this one to Federal Highways. It would be good to let CC AASHTOWare on this, let the BRM team know about this discussion. Or you can send it to us and let us have the discussion with Federal Highways, and we'll CC you in that process. But this is where everyone is aiming to go through all of the data and clean up the files as much as possible. Okay. All right. One last thing, and then I will get to some of the questions that are building up over there. Let me just show you for this last part. So we've gone through that. That's how you do that iteration. Now the last piece where you actually submit to federal highways. You're going to do this. This is like, say I've got my clean files, everything is cleaned up at the beginning of March, and now maybe it's March 10th when I'm actually going to make my submittal file and send it in. I may go through that level 2 iteration just one more time to be sure. Just check. Is there anything that snuck in? If any inspector uploaded something that changed a value and I need to change it back, or anything I need to correct. Just I it almost feels like a compulsion that you go through and check to clean up the data, but you want to submit the cleanest file possible. So on the day of, I usually do one more check and then I send the file to Federal Highways. This last piece, Federal Highways is currently in flux deciding right now whether that is that you're going to upload the file to this link or upload the file to another link. Odds are in either of those places where you're going to upload it, you're going to need that UPAC's security clearance, like login to get into the system. So go ahead and start working on that part now. Watch for an email from them about the link of where you upload it. If they're not sure, and you have kept your local representative in the loop, it might be the kind of thing that you and the local representative have worked out that you're going to send the file to the central office in an email because you're from an agency small enough to be able to do that. Or you're going to send it to your local rep who's able to upload it to the site. Or I don't know. That's the kind of thing where I say reach out to the people often, or be open about it. Don't surprise them on March 15th with, hey, surprise, I don't have any of the links or any of the security clearance, and I don't know what I'm doing with the file. Be prepared for this, for that submittal part. And whatever the process ends up being, then it's just going to be that process every year. So in the same way that I made the file to upload to the file check, you just make the final file and send that to Federal Highways. It's exactly that same process inside of BRM. Okay? Now, with that having been said, let me get to some of these questions. So there was a question about if a routine was performed in 24 and then in 25 they did more. Okay, did you see for that question, I'm going to advise if you go look in the file itself, you can see exactly how BRM is doing that submittal of the individual inspection events. One of the ongoing discussions with Federal Highways is a way to determine what has already been submitted, because the ideal would be that BRM only submits to FHWA the new items each year. But the technological way to determine what was submitted last year versus this year has not been figured out on Federal Highways' end yet. So the current process, if you go in and look at the file, is that it submits everything for now. That does make for a sizable file. That might change in the future. That's probably something that you will see in subsequent versions of BRM when Federal Highways has some more direction for us on that one. There is a question about information on the database model, so the shape of that JSON file. That is actually in the opening introduction of the SNBI guide. So if you were to open this guide and scroll down probably 20 or 30 pages into the introduction, it has the shape of the JSON file defined. So it's not BRM defined, that is defined by Federal Highways. Good question. Okay. There's another question here about, will there be new validation logic? Yes, I practically guarantee it, because as you can see, Federal Highways is cleaning up the issues on their side, and we are then trying to keep up with the validation logic as it changes. I am certain that we're going to go through this first upload on March 15th, and then there's going to be new direction, whether that's another errata comes out that says now do it this way, or new rules about what is checked. I'm certain we're going to see more validation logic coming out at some point, which is why I say the best process is as you notice things, report that. Report it to us, report it to Federal Highways, let people know so that in each of these iterations, we can clean up those things. And maybe the answer is, oh, we know about that one. We're going to fix it in the next version. But sometimes you find something new and help everyone else by notifying everyone about the things that you find, the discrepancies that you come across. Okay. There's a question about what is the difference between essentially BRM's validation and the FHWA file check. There should not be any difference, but as we just saw, there were things called out in the FHWA one that were not called out in BRM. And there are things sometimes called out in BRM that are not called out in Federal Highways. That's because we're in flux right now. But ideally, the two would have the same check. So what would this iteration process look like if, say, if we had done this last year with the old file, or if we do this in 5 years from now when everything has settled down and stopped changing? You would do the level 1 iterations, and there might be several items to fix. And then the level 2 one you go through, and it says it's clean because it was already checked in BRM, and you're ready to submit your data right then. So really the only difference between the two would be that the FHWA one is technically authoritative, and going through the process of generating the file is that extra step you have to use in order to use that file check. And then there's a great question. Is there a validation module available for Tunnel? I will admit I haven't gone to look at the Tunnel side of the FHWA website in a little while, but check. There might be a file check on that site. I would say go check. Okay. There is a question about that EP01 that was being called out. For that particular structure that was being, this one, back in level 1, my EP01 code, it was saying that, hey, you have to have something called out. This is one of the things that's going to be fixed on the BRM side because FHWA has adjusted their logic since we released BRM 7.1 as an example of how quickly these systems keep changing. So it used to be that the validation rules said you had to have something reported. And now they've clarified that you don't report EP01 if the bridge is open. At least that's the latest version as of this week. That direction, of course, could change between now and March. So hang on and try to keep up with Federal Highways. But it's true that as much as possible, so like if you did not use the load rating module in BRM 6, then some of your load ratings probably did not make the migration to BRM 7 because they were not associated with what vehicle should be used to translate them from tons to load factors. In which case, yes, you need to go and find those load rating values and migrate them if you can. Is it a critical error if you don't have those values? I would use whether it shows up in the acceptable or critical on the Federal Highways file check as your guide for that, but also reach out to Federal Highways if you have questions, right? There is another question there about what are acceptable errors. Okay, so this is an idea that has been around for several years, probably decades, of the last submittals. The primary errors essentially are the kinds of things that prevent Federal Highways from receiving your file at all. It's technically what that means. So they can't accept the file because something is in there. Acceptable errors means that there's something that they think is unusual. You should probably clean it up, but it's not to the same level of we can't even accept that file. That's what the difference is between those file types or the error types. All right, I realize I am running out of some questions, running out of time to answer some questions. Don't be afraid to email us at at BRM to submit JIRA tickets, to reach out to your federal highways rep sometimes. Like, do your best to guess where the questions should go, but sometimes they will say, oh, that's actually a question for the other group. And everyone's in these discussions together, which is the adventures of the submittal process changing right now. But I hope that as an overview, this has given you a good feeling for what it is that you typically go through, this process that you go through to submit every year. So you do that preparation part, and you can see once you have the filter set up, once you've decided that, hey, we submit quarterly, or in this house, we submit on January 1st, whatever that preparation step is, once those are done, you just follow the same process every year. It's actually very straightforward. Level 1 iterations, as you go through and clean up your data, this list is going to become much smaller, and it should be the kind of thing that each inspection year, it's a short list of things you need to go through and fix. It happens. Inspectors code things one way, and then the validation says, oh, you actually need a substructure set. You didn't have one. Surprise. So, you go through and you clean those things up as best you can. But it's just get used to doing those iterations. And then as BRM and the FHWA file check converge and settle on the set rules, and Federal Highways stops needing to adjust the rules, then that second level iteration is just a sanity check to make sure when I create the file, does it create the file the way that I expected? Does it submit clean? And then that file, if everything looks clean, is good to submit to Federal Highways. I will also say the Federal Highways reps like to get a copy of the export from the Federal Highways file check site that says that the file is clean. It's one of the things that just makes their life easier as well. So with all of that said, we welcome more questions. It's not a problem to ask them. Go ahead and reach out to us, whether that is making a service desk ticket, or if you want to email them to me, or email them to brm@mayvue.com. Reach out to us any way that you can. Good luck with creating your submittal files. This is a fun process. I've been through it many times. It kind of makes you part of the community that we're all going through this every year. It's kind of like you're being inducted into the club now. So with that, thank you for your time, and let us know if there's anything else we can do to help.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Zac and the Mayvue team. With that, as I mentioned at the beginning, this was recorded, so we will get that recording email out to all of you probably tomorrow morning sometime. Thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week.